In Shakhty, Rostov region, there was a serial killer who was a disciple of Chikatilo. He started committing crimes at the age of 13 and had been tried for robbery. At some point, he decided to set a record for speed murders. This man, named Vladimir, was born on April 22, 1960, the birthday of Vladimir Lenin, and was named after the first Soviet leader. The boy was not a welcome child because his father abandoned his mother shortly before his birth and left him for another woman. When his mother became pregnant, she and her former partner began to think about getting married, but her mother-in-law disapproved of her daughter-in-law. When the mother's son gave in and married another woman, his pregnant bride was kicked out of the house. As a result, the mother hated her unborn child and constantly blamed him for all her problems. The child knew no motherly love and heard only criticism from relatives. He also suffered bullying by his peers at school and often ran away from class and home, hiding in a nearby cemetery. Later, in an attempt to relieve stress, he became aggressive toward animals. For example, he stabbed a collective farm cow or horse. From the age of 13, Mukhankin began committing robberies and thefts, usually attacking people in deserted places with a heavy object and stealing their hats, bags, jewelry, and other personal belongings. He was first arrested in 1979, and by the time he was 35 he had spent more than 13 years in prison. Because of his resemblance to the leader of the world proletariat, he was nicknamed Lenin. In 1987, after serving another term, Vladimir decided to start a new life and married a girl named Tatiana, whom he met on a bus. A year later their son Dmitry was born, but family life did not work out. Mukhankin returned to his old habits and soon found himself behind bars again. Unfortunately, in 1997, after his father was arrested, Mukhankin's son drowned in the Kuban River. From January to February of 1995, the criminal committed several robberies and thefts, but this was not enough for him. On February 15, he committed his first murder. Information is circulating on the internet that the serial killer's first victim was his lover's partner, who allegedly asked the killer to help her get rid of him. They then engaged in sexual intercourse near the cooling body, which awakened the beast in the killer. However, this is not entirely true. According to the official document of the court verdict, the first victim was 12-year-old Natasha Glukareva. That day Vladimir decided to visit his younger brother on his mother's side, but he was not in the apartment. The door was opened by a woman who knew her brother, and with her was a teenage girl. They were watching a video together when the killer struck up a conversation with the girl and suggested a walk. He led Natasha to a remote area, where he killed her and burned her clothes. The next victim was 53-year-old Lilia Ivashka, who was attacked by the killer just 5 days after the first murder. He was returning home after a drunken night out when a passing woman stopped to help him because he had nearly been hit by a car. Suddenly the killer jumped up and attacked the woman, seriously injuring her. He then dragged her body across the railroad tracks to a secluded spot. Indeed, the serial killer's only male victim was his lover's partner, Sergei Ustinov. That day they got drunk, had an argument, and the killer stabbed Ustinov several times with his trademark weapon, the bayonet. After the murder, the killer and his assistant dragged the body to a barn, and later the body parts were moved and buried by accomplices. The killer temporarily stopped the March 10 murders after he committed shoplifting and took the stolen goods to his mistress' apartment, where he lived with her and her son. On March 19, Mukhankin and Legshenko went to visit their acquaintance Galina Miroshnikova. The company started drinking, and when the alcohol ran out, Vladimir suggested they go to Sledchenko's apartment to continue the party. Galina brought her 8-year-old daughter, they put the children to bed, and the party continued. At some point, Mukhankin suggested the company go out for some fresh air, and all three went out to the landing. Suddenly a maniac attacked Galina on the landing, hitting her with a bayonet. The murderer stripped the woman of her jewelry and gave it to his accomplice, after which he began to bayonet her brutally. After the brutal murder, the perpetrator removed the woman's coat, as well as her crystal set, clothing, and jewelry. Then, to cover up the murder, he decided to kill her daughter. Together with an accomplice, he returned to the apartment and brutally murdered the sleeping girl. The body was taken to a landfill in Shakhty and buried under rocks. On April 4, Mukhankin killed saleswoman Natalia Tyrina during a supermarket robbery. On May 1 he killed railroad worker Yelena Stefan. On April 16, he attacked Lena Vinogradova, a participant in a children's orienteering competition and one of the few survivors of the maniac's attacks. The incident took place in a remote area, and the girl had stopped to orient herself according to a plan she had made. At that time Mukhankin attacked her from behind and struck her in the lumbar region with his bayonet, causing the girl to lose consciousness. When she came to, she saw that the maniac was trying to strangle her, covering her mouth and nose. Lena managed to push him off with her foot and run away. Vladimir did not pursue her and chose to run away. Lena later identified the terrifying killer as Mukhankin, and he was also identified by another surviving girl, Lena's daughter.
Hey, I'm not going to beat around the bush. You have to subscribe to the channel and like it so you don't miss new videos.
Late on the evening of May 1, 1995, Valentina Falka and her daughter were returning from the local cemetery when they were attacked by a maniac who frequented the place. He had been attracted to cemeteries since childhood. When he saw the woman and the girl, he attacked Lena first, stabbing her twice. Valentina shouted to her daughter to run away and Lena ran towards the apartment buildings. The maniac tried to catch up with the teenager, but failed and again attacked Valentina, stabbed her several times, stole only his valuables and tried to escape. However, he was soon detained by a man whom the girl called for help. At first, authorities believed that the crimes were committed by two different people, one attacking people in order to rob them, and the other killing and torturing them. But law enforcement later concluded that it was one and the same person. Interestingly, at one point during the robberies, the son of another famous maniac, Yuri Chikatilo, was suspected of committing the crimes, but he was later proven to be innocent. The maniac, who behaved in a very defiant and unrepentant manner, even tried to pretend to be crazy to avoid responsibility for his actions, but was found sane and aware of his horrible actions. He seemed proud of his crimes and claimed that compared to him Chikatilo was just a child. He admitted that he planned to kill law enforcement officers and take the lives of 40 people in a short period of time. The maniac even boasted that he wanted to set a record for the speed with which he could kill. He blamed everything on his mother and said that by punishing his victims he was taking revenge on her for her cruelty towards him. After his arrest, Mukhankin confessed to all the crimes, but refused to testify against himself in court because he was facing the death penalty. He claimed that someone else had committed the murders of Ustinov, his mother, and his daughter Miroshnikova. However, other evidence, including items found in his possession that belonged to the victims, confirmed his guilt. He was sentenced to death by firing squad, but the death penalty was later commuted to life imprisonment due to a moratorium. During this period Mukhankin believed for some time that he would be executed. One day his mother visited him, and in her presence he became submissive and fearful. Journalists tried to interview her, but she refused to talk about her son. Investigator Armakan Yanayev, wishing to better understand his ward, traced the fate of Mukhankin's classmates, most of whom were convicted of grave crimes. Mukhankin himself was imbued with a certain respect for India, and the investigator was the only person who tried to understand him. Later, Yanayev and Alexander Luxemburg jointly wrote a book, Portrait of a Serial Killer in the Interior, which included Mukhankin's revelations. In it, the investigator tried to trace the process of how a person becomes a maniac as part of his punishment. Vladimir Mukhankin was transferred to the Black Dolphin prison for life, where he remains to this day. As of the end of November 2021, the criminal is living in prison, composing poems. Some of them can be found online. In his poems, The criminal blames society for his misdeeds and cruelty, talks about his difficult fate, and claims to have learned a lot. His poems dedicated to his mother are filled with genuine and sincere love. Who knows, had it not been for unrequited love, things might have turned out differently. In 2009, the criminal gave a short interview in which he said that he preferred an immortal execution because life in prison was unbearable for him. Of course, Vladimir Mukhankin's fate raises questions. Most serial killers had a terrible childhood, being bullied by their peers. This is a fact. However, one should not entirely shift responsibility for the crimes committed onto society's shoulders. Unfortunately, during the Soviet era, and even now, many people did not have a very happy childhood. Some had parents who abused alcohol, some were abandoned by their relatives. Some were mocked and bullied by classmates. But not everyone who went through hardships picked up a knife and started killing. Many people who went through difficult situations as children became very strong individuals.